Hello. I'm honored today to be joined by my colleague, Pamela Payton of the San Diego Foundation. Hey,
Hi,
Pamela.
Marcus.
Hey there. Hey there. I understand that as San Diego Foundation's Chief Impact and Partnerships Officer, you've helped direct $66 million, is that right? $66 million for local COVID response. You've launched the Black Community Investment Fund, and you've enabled community-led solutions across San Diego. And from what I understand, you have some very flattering social media comments on your Twitter in particular from some esteemed colleagues locally. If you could give us a sense of your journey of how you've gotten here, we'd love to learn from your experience. So what have been some of your key observations along the journey?
Well, I'd love to tell you about my journey. I started with the San Diego Foundation June 1st of 2020. So imagine where we were, what was happening at that time.
Yeah,
I had worked in higher education for 23, almost 24 years, and had this moment of clarity in late 2019 when my youngest daughter said, "You're free to go and do whatever you want to do." And really had to ask myself, what was that? Not looking at what I had done in my career, what I was doing at the time in higher education, but really, if I could do anything, what would I do? And what I recognized is that what brought me the most joy was the work that I was doing in the community. I served on a couple of boards. I'd been a volunteer with some really wonderful organizations and saw that these organizations were making such an impact in our community in spite of the lack of resources. And so I thought, how could I help to bring resources to these very, very noble, intentional organizations in a way that was not just going to sustain them, but really bring resources to the community. And so it was in that moment that I thought, I will have to start my own company. That is the only way that I will be able to do this work. And then the opportunity to join the San Diego Foundation in this role came my way. And early on, this was now in March of 2020, I watched, as the rest of the region did, how the San Diego Foundation was responded through its COVID Community Response Fund, and thought I could very well be a part of that. And here we are. I started June 1st and have not looked back once. It's been a journey like no other, but I am so grateful for this experience and the time that I joined the organization, because they've moved in a direction that I think the community and the region desperately needed. And so to see that unfolding and being a part of that is just incredibly gratifying for me personally. And to feel, that our team, our organization is making a difference in lives really is very, very gratifying work.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. It's, just sharing the stage with you now, there's a sense of grace that is easily perceived. And so it's almost not surprising to hear that your journey has unfolded in the way that it has. But I'd love to represent the voice of some folks who maybe grace doesn't come so easily for them. What are some observations you made along the way that might be instructive for some of us who are really interested in capitalizing on this moment, where there seems to be a historical openness for reimagining our systems, for doing things differently? You've been successful in some ways that are implicit in your story, but maybe you can give us an example or two of some things that are a little more explicit.
What I have seen is, and this again, going back to our community, our COVID Community Response Fund, was that the needs are grave across the region. And there are organizations who perhaps have never partnered with an organization like mine, smaller grassroots nonprofits, who work really hard bringing desperately needed relief across the region, but had not been a part of the institution. And so we really wanted to learn as much as we could from these nonprofits to direct our philanthropy. And that has been so instrumental to the work that we've done. And it's something that I would recommend for any organization, to listen to the community. They know what they need. They just haven't been heard. They haven't been asked. So we really have extended this table to invite as many people to the table as we can. Now, granted, with our fund, we were able to distribute $66 million in the course of our COVID Community Response Fund, but the request far exceeded what we were able to give.
I understand.
But yet at the same time, I think we were very intentional about ensuring that there was a broad representation of the community and serving very strategically different types of issues. And so I really encourage other organizations to invite the community to the table. You know, we can't know what others need without asking and without being willing to listen. And that is what I hope that we've been able to do effectively at the San Diego Foundation, and one that I hope to see more organizations doing at the same time.
Oh, I love that. Certainly it's been my experience with some of your colleague organizations that represent the GEO community. There's an openness to community. There's a conversation around community that at the awareness level, if you will, it's logical. There's a desire to move forward in that way. And then within our cohort experience, when we roll up our sleeves together to do the work, to grapple with the complexity of operationalizing those values, our missions, our visions, I noticed that there's a bit of a struggle to move from the idea and the awareness to the action. Again, I know that you care about the reality and you care about community and establishing what I refer to as a generative relationship with those in community. But how do we do that with large institutions who by design weren't necessarily in the business of establishing community? Perhaps even were more interested in return on investment under different circumstances.
It's a great question. And recently I participated in a cohort with other peers across the country who represented 20 different community foundations. And within that community, I learned that everyone, didn't have the experience that I had. In our case, I've explained to you to some degree how intentional we've been about this approach. But for a lot of my peers, that has not been easy. And in some cases, they've had to abandon what looked like logical focus on racial and social justice, which is the moment that we're in right now. Because there was a lack of support within the organization, perhaps within the board, or in the case, in organizations like ours with the donor community. Not everyone feels that this is the way they want to invest their resources. So in our case, and in what I hope becomes normalized, is that let's be honest with ourselves. Let's look at our region. Let's look at our communities. Let's look at the cities that we have a responsibility to support and understand what those needs are. And instead of prioritizing, one over the other, is there a way that we can do both? Is there a way that we can support our fund holders and also support our community with what it really is asking and saying it needs? And I believe it is possible. In fact, I think for those courageous organizations, what you may often find is that you're going to bring along new donors, new partners who previously did not see the vision, didn't see that you shared that vision with them. And in light of in our case, moving along this particular path, we've been able to identify some new partners that are just happy to see the commitment. We started last year with a development of a new strategic plan that was approved by our board in June of this year. And it's very, very focused on justice, equity, and resilience, advancing racial and social justice. We say it. We actually say advancing racial and social justice, fostering equity of opportunity, building resilient communities, and developing world-class philanthropy. We can't do anything without the philanthropic support.
For sure.
And so it's really giving purpose to the work that has served to benefit our staff, our leadership, our board, our donors. Everyone knows where we're moving. And the respect and the appreciation for that, I think, has given everyone clarity that perhaps might have been lacking previously. But it's a focus that responds to the needs of the moment. Indeed. We're at a crossroads,
yes,
in our world.
Yes.
And you have an opportunity to either acknowledge that crossroads and respond accordingly, or be ignorant to what your community is actually saying is needed and continue down the path that we were on previously. I am very, very pleased that our organization saw the crossroads as an opportunity to course correct and to really redirect ourselves in a way that is responsive.
I am too.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Before we dig into any more questions, I just wonder if there's anything in particular, particularly with that framing of the crossroads, where we find ourselves. Has there been anything that just stood out as particularly frustrating or a tricky dynamic that you're either wrestling with now or you had to address as a part of this transformative experience at the foundation?
If anything, I'd say just wanting to do more and not having the resources. I mean, as a result of saying who we are, you suddenly start to hear from organizations that had not previously.
On the grantee side.
From grantees, exactly, who perhaps previously were unknown to us. And now that you see them and you recognize the work that they're doing and how it really intersects with the priorities, we want to fund everyone. We want to support all of these organizations to both from a capacity building level, but also to have impact in the community. And just not having the resources to do all of that work, it would be wonderful if I'm happy to open up the big bucket and just let it all pour in. But that probably is my greatest frustration, is just not having enough resources to respond to all the really critical needs in the community.
I get it.
I'm grateful for what we do have and what we are able to do with those resources. But if there were any frustration, it's just, how do we bring more people on board? For sure.
So we need those donors. We need more donors. Got it. And to be fair, we also understand that philanthropy is just a part of the equation. So the total mosaic for San Diego and Imperial counties includes government. It includes all types of municipal actors, folks across various sectors, private sector partners. So the invitation is to all of them.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Great.
We've recently really established some great relationships with the government offices in the region that have enabled us to support their work through philanthropy into the community, serving everything from childcare providers to supporting education, providing, responding to the digital needs of kids. The government has played such an important role in our ability to be responsive to the community. And there are more resources coming into cities and municipalities across the country as a result of, most recently, the American Rescue Plan, but other funds as well. So I encourage organizations to look at those resources and how to best utilize them.
Wow, well, what a treat for me to be able to do this. I have another question, if I may.
Oh, dear.
But no, it's really just based upon what you said. I mean, I meant it when I talked about the grace that you exude. And even in the story, from this seat, what I'm hearing is that you had something to do with the quality of the relationship between the foundation and the government, municipal actors. It's not just something that happens across every story that I hear, right? And so I'm just wondering again, what is it that you have brought? Perhaps you haven't even thought about it. It just comes natural to you. But for those of us who are in cities where there's some territorial considerations, some parochial dynamics that tend to characterize our regional activities as grant makers. Again, just how have you observed that space? And particularly, how have you navigated the foundation to be able to capitalize in a way that you described? I promise that would be my last question for now.
You know, I would just like to think that I wake up every day living my purpose. And that if I am fortunate enough to be in this role and to match these things that I care so deeply about together to affect change, that's what I'm going to do. I have had the pleasure of working in government. I've worked in, as I mentioned, higher education. I've worked with other nonprofit organizations that are doing important work. But to finally be in a place where all of these relationships that I've established over many years in San Diego are finally able, I can bring everyone to the table.
Yeah, it's like a purpose-driven moment.
It's like a puzzle.
Yeah.
And the puzzle pieces are finally coming together, and I can connect
relate.
Pieces that didn't know each other previously to do important work that they're both very focused and intentionally on. That's what I'm able to do right now. And I really see it as really a confluence of so many things happening simultaneously. The pandemic and the tragedy that it has brought really meant that organizations like ours needed to stand up. And I'm proud that we did. Having a person who leads our organization that is incredibly compassionate and cares deeply and is also very, very kind and generous and understands the philanthropic community much better than I do. And then having a board that said, what can we do, Pam?
Yeah.
How can we help? To be willing to step up and build programs like our Black Community Investment Fund and to invest $1 million in the fund to help buyers purchase their first home. These are highly unusual, but very, very specific approaches that our organization has invested in. And I don't know that it might have happened a decade ago or 5 years ago or 3 years ago. It's happening now. And in this moment, we're doing everything that we can to really support the growth of the region for everyone.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So I'd love to ask you a couple of questions.
Okay.
I heard you saying earlier that now is a time for change.
Yes.
Why? Why is it now?
Yeah. Thank you. I'm very conscientious about speaking in terms of what the GO community teaches us. And so in that context, it's as much my personal point of view as much as it is this group of funders committed to transforming philanthropic culture and practices, right? And so, as I described, and you so eloquently described just a few minutes ago, this moment is characterized by so much openness, right? Despite the upheaval, the ambiguity, the complexity of our work to respond to a situation that none of us has seen before, and in ways that we weren't even designed, we weren't even structured to respond. Your COVID response, I'm sure you had to change some rules and do some gymnastics that not everyone is capable of doing. And so I've seen enough stories. We've had enough testimonial across the organizations that comprise our membership to see the pattern. And the pattern is clear. And they're asking, now that we know what to do, now that we're committed to this change, we saw how atrocious this is. We can't believe it's so bad. What can we do?
Right.
What can we do? And anytime someone is vulnerable enough to ask, to acknowledge, I don't know what to do, I feel like it's incumbent upon organizations that refer to themselves as philanthropy serving. We like to say philanthropy mobilizing organizations. We say, come over here. We'll meet you where you are. As long as you're committed to changing the conditions from the status quo, which we all have at this point acknowledged was falling short of our own expectations, our collective aspirations, then we'll meet you with the kinds of resources that are responsive to wherever you are on your journey of growth. And we'll be there to support you through as an accountability partner. To remind you when you made that declaration at one time, and it's a little different than the behavior we see today. We'll say, hey, this looks a little different. Help us understand the difference here. But we won't leave you behind, right? And we just believe that in relationship, built on trust, that's where we establish the kind of accountability that can translate into the kind of action that you exhibited so like plainly, so exemplary at the foundation. Yeah.
And if I can ask you a question similar to what you asked me, what frustrations are you experiencing?
Well, it's interesting. I just wish there was more time. I don't often experience frustrations. I'm aware of, personally, I understand frustration to be a result of when we try to make something happen. It's a result of like an emotional reaction to forcing something. I want change to happen differently than it is right now. And so I've kind of come to grips with that over time to say, if it takes 30 years to reverse 300 years of inequity and harm, then you know what? Sign me up for that 30. I'll ride it out. And if that means I only participate in a percentage of that, then at least I'm contributing to the liberation of a population or a group of leaders that comes after me.
Yes.
And so it's a generational approach to this work, and that changes the frustration to hope and optimism. Honestly, I have to say, and I'm curious about you, within this context of adjusting and allowing myself to be open and vulnerable, express myself fully in response to these different conditions, I've had to allow myself to be shaped by the thing itself, moving through adversity as opposed to around it, under it, avoid. The way to is through. It is another thing that we understand from our community. And so I use the services of coaches, executive coaches for my team, for myself. I've been an executive coach now for over a decade. And there's it's an acknowledgement that there's a personal impact to these structural barriers. And without addressing them both, I think we leave ourselves susceptible to ongoing frustration that can materialize physically as illness. And that doesn't serve any of us. So how does that resonate, and how you take care of yourself, or how you think about self-care within this context before we wrap up?
Interestingly, it's been a year like no other for me personally, from a health standpoint. And what I recognized was that my work actually invigorated me during a time where I might have had a different response. And so I find that the balance between the work and caring for myself and my family and all the other responsibilities that I have is hard. And so at no point do I think that it's balanced. It's a little bit more here this week and a little bit more there next week.
I can relate to that.
But just keeping my eye on my purpose, my goals. What is it that we're trying to accomplish as an organization? What am I trying to do personally? Is all so essential for me to organize and to be organized, and to have people who set me straight. When I need it. I have a really, really fantastic team of colleagues that I work with that are always helping to educate me, and we look out for each other. We try to make sure that the work is balanced to the extent that it can be, and step in to help one another when needed. But also learning. This world is new to me. This is not the work that I did for the first part of my career. And so jumping in at this moment, at this really, really critical moment where so much about philanthropy was changing, gave me a chance to come in with a completely different perspective than someone who needed to be shifted and moved. I came in ready and open to see things anew. And I have really found that invigorating, to be completely honest with you. It's hard. As I said earlier, because the demands are so grave, and when you care the way we care, it's hard not to be touched by what you're experiencing, what you're seeing. But I find that being focused on the work and what can we do organizationally, and what can I do personally, really just gives me energy. I wake up,
I
I still wake up and I pinch myself.
I tell you, my participation in Catalyst provides that same thing for me. Just a network of folks that I know are accountability partners, allies, sounding boards, for all of the things that you described. Even being a part of this amazing opportunity to get to know you a little bit. Thank you so much for sharing. Thank you so much for asking me about my perspective and providing an opportunity to share a little bit about the GEO network, about which I'm so passionate as well. I'm looking forward to working with you in the future.
Same here. Thank you.
Wow, you too.
Wow, look at this.
I can't imagine a better way to wrap up than the reflections that you just shared. I want to invite you into one last vision to leave us with. Marcus opened up with the framework and what we were going to learn. But what is hopeful about this time? We talked about, or you talked about, why it's a moment for change. Why we're progressing towards something built on relationships and trust. What is that something?
You want to go first?
You both are looking at me. I know my orders here. Actually, I am very hopeful, in part because a story like this is not so uncommon anymore, right? There's a way in which someone could say, you know, this is a great example of why diversity is a part of this EI, right? It's not just equity, it's not just, but the composition of our field, the individual within that space, the conditions for retention and support and connection to decision making matter. Like, I just heard firsthand an amazing example of that, and have the luxury of being able to see this in other spaces around the nation. And so that can only give me hope. It didn't used to be like this.
Yeah.
I remember making the case for equity a decade ago, and some people still being on the fence like, well, I know what the data says, but now that's a foregone conclusion. Yeah. And so what a blessing.
I was just thinking about how grant makers for effective organizations, that's been the name for a long time, but now we are redefining what it means to be effective.
That's right. Without equity, you can't be as effective as you possibly can.
Yeah.
Right? We're making that claim. And what I heard from you is that it's time for philanthropy to make a claim, to take a stance. That's exciting.
And we're seeing that. You know, we're seeing that in philanthropy, not just locally, but across the country. When you look at a lot of the shifts and the resources that have been made available in the last year to address issues of equity and social justice, racial justice, no longer can we deny the inequities that have existed in our country for centuries. You said that earlier. Right. So not just not denying it, but actually doing something about it. That's where we all are today. And that's what gives me hope, is that there are enough of us who are saying it's time to do better, you know, without any disagreement. I think it's time for us to do better. And what does that mean for each organization? And it looks different. Now, which is okay, because we all are needed. We're all being called to this moment.
Yes, absolutely. We are all called. Thank you. Thank you for being with us today and for setting that vision out in front of us and sharing your real, authentic selves, right? Not sugarcoating the challenges, difficulties, frustrations, but also knowing that when we're in this together, when we're all in, that there is a path forward. And I think that hope and optimism for the future is what keeps us going.
Agreed.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
It was good
good
to have this conversation with you.
Indeed.
That is the conclusion of All In for 2021. And I hope that you were able to learn something about this great region that we have, San Diego and Imperial counties, the people working in and for it, and about yourself. And to think about what are your frustrations and what are the ways that you are going to build towards the future. because it's one thing to have the conversation, to raise awareness, and it is another thing then to act. And Catalyst is here to be your partner in action alongside GEO, alongside the San Diego Foundation, alongside every one of our members and partners. So we hope you'll reach out to us and tell us what struck you today and how we can help be that partner on your journey, so that when we look back in 5 more years, we don't say, well, we learned some lessons, but then we went back to the way things were, because that was how it was done. That was the easy path, because we're not here to take the easy path. We're here to build towards a future that undoes the systems that promote inequity that were so obvious in the last couple of years, and rebuild new ways of thinking. Things that don't even exist yet today. But when we do these things together, we can be all in, not just for ourselves or our organizations, but for every relation that we have in this beautiful and incredibly vibrant region. We also have some follow-on programs, so keep an eye out for the email that sends you a link so we can dive deeper with each of our speakers and have close conversations about what are the actions that we can all take together. We hope you have a wonderful day. Thank you for being with us, and we will see you again soon.